Today I'm going to tell you about people who remember their past lives. This isn't fantasy or fiction. These are real cases that have been studied by scientists for decades. Cases that cannot be explained by logic. Cases that make you think, what if reincarnation actually exists? I'll tell you 3 stories. All of them are documented. All of them have been verified by researchers. And all of them are absolutely incredible. This story took place in the Golani Heights, in the area bordering Syria and Israel. There, in a small village, lives a group of people called the Druze. The Druze believe in reincarnation, and for them it's not just a religious teaching, but part of their everyday life. They have a special belief. When a child is born, they carefully examine the body, looking for birthmarks. Because according to their belief, a birthmark is not just a skin feature. It's a mark from a fatal wound received in a past life. And so in one of these villages, a boy was born. An ordinary, healthy child. But on his forehead was a noticeable red birthmark. His parents noted this, but didn't attach much importance to it. The boy grew up like all children, learning to walk, talk, play. But from early childhood he was tormented by nightmares. Every night he dreamed the same picture. A rock, darkness, horror. He would wake up in tears but couldn't explain anything. He was too young. When the boy turned 3 and learned to speak more or less normally, something strange happened. He approached his parents and said, "I was killed with an axe, hit on the head." His parents were stunned. What nonsense is their 3-year-old son talking about? But the boy continued. He said he remembered his name from his past life. He remembered the village where he lived. He remembered how he had a quarrel with a neighbor. And he remembered how this neighbor killed him with an axe. The scariest part was that the boy named his killer. First and last name, completely clearly without hesitation. A 3-year-old child who had never traveled beyond his village named the full name of a man he had never heard of. The parents told the village elders about this. The Druze took the boy's words seriously. They decided to check. The elders took the boy and led him through the surrounding villages. "Do you recognize anything?" they asked. The boy walked silently, looking around. One village, a second, a third. Nothing. But then they came to another settlement, and the boy suddenly stopped. "Here," he said. "I lived here." The elders began questioning the local residents. "Tell me, did anyone disappear here a few years ago?" The residents looked at each other. "Yes," said one of them. 4 years ago, one man disappeared. We searched for him but never found him. We decided that he had gone somewhere or had an accident." The boy named the name of this missing person. The name matched. The villagers were shocked, but this was only the beginning. The boy said, "I know who killed me, and I know where he lives." The elders led him further through the village. The boy stopped at one of the houses. A middle-aged man came out of the house. He had never seen this child in his life. But the boy looked him straight in the eyes and said, "It's you. You killed me. We had a quarrel and you killed me with an axe." The man turned pale. His hands began to tremble. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. "I didn't kill anyone." But the boy didn't back down. "I even know where you hid my body," he said. "I'll show you." Imagine this scene. A 3-year-old child is leading a group of adults somewhere outside the village. They walk across rocky terrain. The boy walks confidently, as if on a familiar path. Here's that very rock that haunted his nightmares every night. "Here," he says, "under these stones." The men began dismantling the pile of stones. They dug, and suddenly the shovel hit something hard. They dug further, and found a human skeleton. The skull was broken. And it was broken in exactly the part of the head where the boy's birthmark is located. Then they also found the murder weapon, an axe hidden nearby. When the alleged killer was shown these findings, he broke down. He fell to his knees and confessed everything. Yes, 4 years ago he really had a quarrel with a neighbor. They fought. In a fit of rage, he grabbed an axe and hit him on the head. When he realized the neighbor was dead, he panicked. He hid the body under the stones and didn't tell anyone. All these years he lived with this secret. The killer was arrested. The case was taken to court. and the boy stopped having nightmares after that. The memories of his past life gradually began to fade. By the age of 7, he remembered almost nothing. This story was described by German psychotherapist Trutz Hardow in his book Children Who Have Lived Before, Reincarnation Today. The case was also studied by the late Dr. Eli Lash, who was known for his scientific work in Gaza. Both researchers confirmed the story is real. All facts have been verified, and it's impossible to explain this rationally. Story 2. The American Pilot from World War II. Now let's move to America, Louisiana, 1998. A boy is born into an ordinary American family. His parents name him James Leininger. The father, Bruce Leininger, is a conservative Christian. He doesn't believe in any reincarnation at all. It contradicts his religious beliefs. The mother, Andrea, is an ordinary housewife, a normal, educated, modern family. The boy grows up. Everything is going well. When James turns 2, his parents notice that he really loves airplanes. They buy him toy planes, and he's ready to play with them for hours. He drives them along the floor, makes engine sounds, stages air battles. An ordinary childhood hobby, nothing unusual. But then the nightmares begin. Every night, 2-year-old James wakes up screaming. He's covered in sweat, shaking, crying. His parents run to him, trying to calm him down. "What happened, son? What did you dream about?" And the boy, gasping from sobs, screams, "The plane is falling! The plane is on fire! The little man can't get out!" At first, his parents thought these were ordinary childhood nightmares. Maybe he saw something on TV? But in their house, they never watched war movies. Never at all. They didn't even discuss war topics around the child. How could a 2-year-old child know about falling planes and fires? The nightmares continued. Every night the same thing. The parents didn't know what to do anymore. They took him to a pediatrician, to a child psychologist. They shrugged. "Just night terrors," they said. "It happens with children. It will pass." But one day, Bruce, the boy's father, sat down with him for a serious talk. "James, tell me in detail what you're dreaming." And the boy, this 2-year-old child, began to tell. He said that in the dream he's a pilot, that his plane was shot down by the Japanese, that it happened over the Pacific Ocean, that the plane caught fire and he couldn't get out of it. Bruce was stunned. Japanese? Pacific Ocean? How does the child know these things? He continued asking. And James told more details. He said he flew a Corsair plane, that he took off from an aircraft carrier called Natoma Bay, that he had a friend, another pilot, named Jack Larson, and that he was shot down over Iwo Jima Island. Bruce wrote it all down. He was a skeptic, remember? A Christian who didn't believe in reincarnation. But he was also a person who wanted to understand what was happening to his son. And he decided to check. He dug into archives, into historical documents, into World War II records. And you know what he found? The aircraft carrier Natoma Bay actually existed. It participated in battles in the Pacific during World War II. Bruce found the crew lists, and there, among the pilots' names, was a name. James Houston, Jr., a 21-year-old fighter pilot. He died on March 3, 1945. His plane was shot down by Japanese artillery during an attack on Iwo Jima Island. The plane caught fire and fell into the ocean. The pilot died. This James Houston really had a fellow serviceman named Jack Larson. He survived the war. Bruce found him and contacted him. Larson was already a very old man, but his memory was excellent. He confirmed everything. Yes, they served together. Yes, James Houston was his friend. Yes, everything happened exactly as the boy described. But the most incredible thing was yet to come. Little James knew such technical details about World War II aircraft that a 2-year-old child couldn't know. Once his mother bought him a toy plane and said, "Look what a bomb it has under the wing." James looked and corrected her. "That's not a bomb, Mom. That's an auxiliary fuel tank." A 2-year-old child who never studied aviation knew the difference between a bomb and a fuel tank on a 1940s military aircraft. When James played with toy planes, he did a pre-flight check. He walked around the plane, checked some imaginary details, nodded, and only then took off, like a real pilot. His parents recorded this on video. When they showed this video to military pilots, they confirmed, the child is doing everything correctly. That's exactly how a pre-flight check is conducted. Once James told his parents, Corsairs often had flat tires. Bruce checked. It turned out to be true. F-4U Corsair carrier-based fighters really had problems with tires. When landing on an aircraft carrier, the wheels experienced enormous load, and the tires often deflated. This is known by military historians and pilots who studied the technology of that era. But how did a 2-year-old child know this? Bruce continued his investigation. He found the sister of the deceased pilot, James Houston. Her name was Ann Barron. She was already 87 years old. Bruce contacted her, told her the whole story. At first, she didn't believe it, but she agreed to meet. When Ann saw little James Leininger, she burst into tears. The boy looked at old photographs of her brother and began telling about things that only their family knew. He told about James Houston's 3 younger sisters. It's true, he had 3 younger sisters. He described the color of the car Houston drove. It matched. He said that Houston danced on Broadway before the war. This is also true, Ann confirmed. When James Houston's relatives heard all these details from a 4-year-old boy, they were shocked. This is impossible to explain, Ann said. This child knows things that only my brother could know, or someone from our family, but he had never met us before this moment. Bruce Leininger, who started as a skeptic, gradually changed his mind. I'm forced to admit, he said, that my son is somehow the reincarnation of James Houston. I can't explain it. It contradicts everything I believed. But facts are facts. This case became one of the most documented in the history of reincarnation research. A book called Soul Survivor was written about it. It was studied by Dr. Jim Tucker from the University of Virginia, one of the leading specialists in this field. Tucker confirmed, the child couldn't have obtained this information by ordinary means. There were no books, films, or stories from which he could have learned this. Today, James Leininger is already over 20. The memories of his past life completely faded by the age of 7. He lives an ordinary life, studies, works, but his story remains in history as one of the most convincing cases of reincarnation. Story 3, the Hollywood actor. And finally, the third story, Oklahoma, USA, 2004. A boy named Ryan is born into a family, an ordinary American child from an ordinary family. No special signs, no birthmarks, no oddities. Growing up like all children, but when Ryan turns 4, he starts saying strange things. He approaches his mother and says, Mom, I had another mom. Before you. The mother smiles. That was a dream, sweetheart. But Ryan insists, No, Mom, it was real. I lived in Hollywood. I danced on Broadway. I had a big white house with a pool. The mother doesn't attach importance to this. The child is fantasizing. It's normal. But Ryan continues talking about it every day. He gives more and more details. He says he worked in movies, that he had several wives, that he drove expensive cars and lived a luxurious life. One day, the mother shows Ryan an old book about Hollywood that she found at the library. The book was published in the 1950s, full of black and white photographs of stars of that time. The mother thinks, well, the child will look at pretty pictures and calm down. Ryan begins leafing through the book, page after page, actors, actresses, directors, film sets. And suddenly Ryan stops. On one of the photographs, a scene from some film is depicted. Several actors, typical Hollywood staging from the 1940s. Ryan points his finger at one of the men in the background. That's me, he shouts. The mother looks at the photo. There's just some extra actor. The book doesn't even name him, just a nameless person in the frame. But Ryan doesn't back down. Mom, it really was me. I remember this shoot. I remember these people. And he begins telling details about this person's life, that he had 3 sisters, that he first danced in theaters, then worked in cinema. Then he became an agent, represented other actors, that he lived in a luxurious mansion, drove expensive cars. The mother, Cindy, decides to check. She takes the book, finds the publisher, starts looking for information about this photograph. It turned out to be difficult. The book is old. The publisher has long been closed. Cindy writes letters to Hollywood archives. Contacts film historians, looks for any leads. Months pass, and finally she gets lucky. One of the film industry historians identified the photograph. It was a shot from a film made in 1932, and the man Ryan pointed to was eventually identified. His name was Marty Martins. He really started as a dancer on Broadway, then moved to Hollywood, worked as an extra, later became an agent, represented actors, died in 1964. Cindy began looking for Marty Martin's relatives. She found his daughter from one of his marriages, met with her, told her the story. She didn't believe it at first, but when Ryan began telling details of her father's life that no one could know, she was shocked. Ryan told that Marty Martins had 3 sisters. The daughter confirmed, "Yes, it's true." Ryan described the house where Marty lived, a large white mansion with a pool in Beverly Hills. The daughter showed photographs. The house looked exactly as the 4-year-old child described. Ryan said that Marty was married several times. True, he had 4 marriages. Ryan knew the make of the car Marty drove. It matched. Dr. Jim Tucker, who also studied this case, said, "This is one of the most amazing cases in my practice. The child identified an unknown person in an old photograph and told details about his life that we then confirmed through archives and relatives. He couldn't have obtained this information by any normal means." Today, Ryan is already about 20 years old. The memories of Marty Martins gradually faded, as usually happens. He doesn't remember the details, but his story, like the others, remains. Now let's talk about what science thinks about all this. Because these stories aren't just urban legends. They were studied by serious scientists, academic researchers from respected universities. The main researcher of the reincarnation phenomenon was Dr. Ian Stevenson, a Canadian psychiatrist professor at the University of Virginia. He devoted 40 years of his life to this topic. 40 years. From the 1960s to the early 2000s, Stevenson traveled around the world, collecting and studying cases where children remembered their past lives. His methodology was rigorous, scientific. He didn't take stories at face value. He personally interviewed children and their families. He checked every fact, every detail. He looked for documentary confirmation. He cross-checked testimonies from different witnesses. He looked for alternative explanations. Over these 40 years, Stevenson collected and documented more than 3,000 cases. 3,000. These aren't isolated stories, this is a huge database. He published his research in scientific journals, wrote several books, the most famous of which are 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation and Children Who Remember Previous Lives. His works were published in 4 volumes under the general title, Cases of the Reincarnation Type. So what did Stevenson discover? What patterns did he identify? First, children usually start talking about a past life between the ages of 2 and 5. This is the period when they can already speak, but are still quite young. By the age of 7 or 8, memories usually fade. The child simply stops talking about it and most likely forgets. Second, most children describe recent past lives. The average interval between the death of the person they remember and their own birth is about 15 months, not centuries, not millennia. Relatively recent past. Third, in approximately 60% of cases, children describe a violent death, murders, accidents, death in war, disasters. Stevenson assumed that a traumatic death somehow imprints more strongly and is more easily transferred to the next life. Fourth, very often children have birthmarks or birth defects that correspond to the fatal wounds of the person from the past life, as in the case of the boy from the Golani Heights, who had a birthmark exactly where the deceased received an axe blow to the head. Stevenson collected hundreds of such cases and even published medical photographs. Fifth, most often such cases occur in countries where they believe in reincarnation. India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, Lebanon, some regions of Turkey, Druze tribes. But they also occur in Western countries, the USA, Europe, where reincarnation is not part of the dominant religion. After Stevenson's death in 2007, his work was continued by Dr. Jim Tucker, also a professor at the University of Virginia. It was Tucker who studied the cases of James Leininger and Ryan. He continues to collect new cases, applying the same rigorous scientific methodology. Tucker says, "We don't claim to have proven the existence of reincarnation, but we show that there's a phenomenon that requires explanation. Children know things they couldn't have learned by ordinary means, and this happens again and again in different countries, in different cultures. Of course, there are skeptics. Psychologist Richard Wasserman conducted an experiment. He asked children to invent imaginary people and then looked for similar real stories in archives and found matches. His conclusion: coincidences are inevitable, especially if you search purposefully. Other critics talk about confabulation, that is, unconscious invention of details. About cryptomnesia, when a person heard or saw something somewhere but forgot about it, and then remembers it as their own memories. About parental influence, who could have unconsciously suggested details to the child. But how does all this explain the case of the boy who found the murdered person's body? How to explain the knowledge of technical details about World War II aircraft in a 2-year-old child? How to explain the identification of an unknown person in an old photograph with subsequent accurate description of his life? Stevenson and Tucker very carefully filtered out cases where there could be fraud, or where the child could have obtained information by normal means. They studied only those cases where children gave information before contact was established with the family of the deceased person, where facts could be verified by independent sources, where alternative explanations were excluded. And even after such strict selection, more than 2,000 documented cases remained that cannot be explained without invoking the idea of some form of memory passing from one life to another. An interesting point, Stevenson in his research found that children's spontaneous memories significantly differ from past life memories, obtained through hypnotic regression in adults. When adults are put into hypnosis and try to return them to a past life, they often tell fantastic stories that cannot be verified. They remember that they were Egyptian pharaohs, Roman legionaries, medieval knights. This almost always turns out to be fantasy, a game of imagination. But when small children spontaneously, without any hypnosis, start talking about a past life, they describe ordinary people. Peasants, merchants, simple soldiers. Nothing grandiose. Ordinary, often boring life. And these details can be verified and they are confirmed. Stevenson said, "If reincarnation exists, it's not what's described in popular literature. It's not a romantic journey of souls through the centuries. It's something more down to earth, more ordinary." Another interesting fact: children often retain habits and phobias from a past life. The boy who remembered being a pilot retained his love for airplanes. A child who remembered drowning was afraid of water. A girl who remembered being a man preferred boyish games and clothes. And birthmarks, this is especially interesting. Stevenson collected more than 200 cases where a child had a birthmark or birth defect that corresponded to a fatal wound of the person from the past life. He published medical photographs, compared them with photographs of wounds and post-mortem reports. The matches were striking. One boy was born with deformed fingers on his right hand. He told that in a past life his fingers were cut off as a result of an accident. They found a person who really lost his fingers in exactly that way. Another child was born with a large birthmark on his chest. He said he was shot. They found a person who was killed by a shot to the chest. The spot was located exactly where the entrance wound was. How to explain this? How can a physical trauma from one life transfer to another in the form of a birthmark? This doesn't fit at all into our understanding of biology and genetics. But the facts are stubborn. Of course, all this doesn't prove reincarnation in an absolute sense. Perhaps there's some other explanation. Maybe some form of memory that's transmitted not through genes but in some other way. Maybe something related to quantum physics, to what we don't yet understand about the nature of consciousness. Stevenson and Tucker didn't insist that reincarnation is the only possible explanation. They said, "We're showing the phenomenon. Here's the data. Explain it however you want, but the explanation must account for all the facts, not ignore inconvenient details." What's interesting is that with the development of the internet and social media, more such stories have begun to appear. Parents share strange statements from their children. My 3-year-old son told me today, when I was an adult, I had other children. My 4-year-old daughter says she remembers dying in a fire. My son describes a house we never lived in, but the description exactly matches my grandmother's house, which he never saw. Of course, most of such stories are just childhood fantasy. Children fantasize a lot, it's normal. But some cases make you think, especially when a child gives specific, verifiable details, names, dates, places, and these details are confirmed. Personally, I don't know what to think about all this. Reincarnation? Possibly. Some unknown form of memory? Maybe. A series of incredible coincidences? Also can't be ruled out. But one thing I know for sure, these stories are real. They're documented, they've been studied, and they have no simple explanation. So we've looked at 3 stories. The boy who found his murderer, the child who remembered being a pilot in World War II, the 4-year-old boy who identified an unknown Hollywood actor in an old photograph. All 3 stories have been studied by scientists. All 3 are confirmed by documents, testimonies, independent sources. All 3 cannot be explained by ordinary means of obtaining information. What does this mean? Does reincarnation actually exist? Do souls move from one body to another? Or is there some other mechanism at work here that we don't yet understand? I can't give you a definitive answer. No one can. Even scientists who have devoted decades to this don't give categorical conclusions. They say, here's the phenomenon, here's the data, think for yourselves. But here's what I can say for sure. The world is much more mysterious than we think. Consciousness, memory, personality, all of this is much more complex than it seems. Maybe we really do live more than one life. Maybe some part of us continues to exist after death and returns again. Or maybe reality is structured completely differently than we imagine. And now a question for you. Do you remember anything strange from your childhood? Places you've never been to but that seemed familiar? People you've never met but seemed to know? Dreams that were too realistic, too specific to be just dreams. Maybe these were just fantasies. Or maybe these were memories. Memories of a life you lived before this one. Write your stories in the comments. I'd be interested to read them. This was Chernets. Thanks for your attention.